Daniel and Sarah were the kind of couple that people looked up to, at least in the beginning. Their relationship seemed like a perfect blend of youthful passion and spontaneous adventure. The two of them had first crossed paths at a summer barbecue 2 years back, where Daniel's steady, easygoing nature complemented Sarah's lively and expressive personality. Within a year, they had tied the knot, brimming with excitement about starting their journey together. But now, just a year and a half later, things had taken a turn. Daniel, a man known for his calm demeanor and caring heart, was working long hours at a local accounting firm. He still made time for thoughtful gestures, leaving sweet notes on the fridge or planning quiet evenings for the two of them, but what once brought smiles and warmth from Sarah now seemed to go unnoticed. It felt like nothing he did could make her happy anymore. Sarah, who had always been fiery and impulsive, started picking fights over things Daniel couldn't quite wrap his head around. One evening, as they prepared dinner, she snapped at him out of the blue. "You don't even follow me on social media, Daniel. That just proves you don't care about me anymore," she accused, her voice sharp with frustration. Daniel sighed, trying to stay composed. "Sarah, I live with you. I'm right here, every single day. Isn't that what really matters?" But Sarah wasn't having it. "If you truly loved me, you'd want to see everything I post. Why don't you care about being involved in my life?" On another occasion, the issue was his friends. After Daniel casually mentioned plans to golf with his buddies on a Saturday, Sarah turned accusatory. "You promised you'd spend time with me," she said, her voice laced with hurt. "But I guess they're more important than I am." Daniel tried to reason with her, explaining that a little time apart for hobbies and friends was normal in any healthy relationship. But instead of calming her, his words only seemed to pour fuel on the fire. Even the smallest things, like forgetting to take out the trash, turned into heated arguments. "You're doing it on purpose just to irritate me," she'd accuse. And the worst blow of all came when she questioned his fidelity. "Are you cheating on me, Daniel? Is that why you're so distant?" Those words hit him hard, not because they were true, but because they couldn't have been further from the truth. Daniel was drained from constantly defending himself when he had done nothing wrong. He proposed solutions, romantic weekend getaways, couples counseling, anything to bring them back to a better place. But Sarah brushed off his efforts with a dismissive, "Everything's fine," only to start another argument the very next day. When their fights became too intense, Sarah would storm out of the house. Sometimes, she'd go to her sister's place, other times, she'd meet up with friends. And each time, Daniel was left in their now too quiet home, staring at the walls and wondering where their happiness had disappeared to. The pattern repeated so often that it felt like an unending cycle Daniel couldn't escape. Just when he thought things were calming down, Sarah would drop the word "divorce" into a heated argument. "Maybe we're not meant to be," she'd say tearfully, leaving him to wonder if she really meant it. But by the next morning, she'd act as though nothing had happened, and life would resume in its strained version of normal. Daniel, patient by nature, was beginning to feel the toll of it all. He still loved Sarah and was determined to save their marriage, but lately, it felt like he was fighting alone. One argument started just like the others, small, insignificant, but quickly spiraling into something much bigger. This time, it was about a loose hinge on the cabinet door that Daniel had forgotten to fix. To Sarah, though, it symbolized something far more serious. "You never listen to me, Daniel," she exclaimed, her voice shaking with anger. Sitting on the edge of their worn couch, Daniel rubbed his temples, trying to keep his cool. "Sarah, it's not that I don't listen. It's just been a crazy week. I'll fix it tomorrow, I promise." "Tomorrow?" she shot back, pacing the room. "That's always your answer. Maybe I'm just tired of waiting for tomorrow." "Tomorrow? That's always your excuse," Sarah shot back, her voice sharp as she paced back and forth. "Maybe I'm done waiting for tomorrow. Maybe I'm just done with all of this." "Sarah, Stop, Daniel said firmly, standing up and meeting her eyes. This isn't about a cabinet hinge, is it? You're upset, but you're not even giving me a chance to fix things. The word divorce hovered between them, unspoken yet heavy, like a storm cloud ready to burst. Lately, it had been brought up so often that Daniel hated how it seemed to loom over every argument, like an invisible weapon Sarah could wield at any moment. Taking a deep breath, he steadied his voice. Listen, I love you. But we can't keep living like this. We need help. For the first time in weeks, Sarah didn't snap back. The fiery defiance in her eyes dimmed, and her shoulders sagged under the weight of his words. You think we need therapy? She asked, her tone softer, uncertain. I do, Daniel replied gently. I think a family therapist could really help us figure out how to communicate better. We both need to understand what's happening here, Sarah. I want this to work. I really do. Sarah looked down, biting her lip as if mulling it over. Maybe you're right, she said after a long pause. But then, with hesitation, she added, I don't know if I'm ready for that yet. Daniel's voice carried the exhaustion of someone clinging to hope. Then what are you ready for? He asked, almost pleading. Suddenly, Sarah's face lit up, as if a bright idea had just struck her. I need a break, she said, her voice almost giddy with excitement. A fresh perspective. Rachel and Natalie have been planning a girls' trip to Europe for months now. I could go with them, take some time to think, clear my head. Daniel blinked, caught off guard. A trip to Europe? Right now? Why not? Sarah said, her tone growing more insistent. It's been a little dream of mine, to see Paris, Rome, Barcelona. This could be the reset I need. We need. The suggestion made Daniel uneasy. Space wasn't what he'd had in mind when he thought about saving their marriage. How long would you be gone? He asked, his voice edged with hesitation. Just 12 days, Sarah said quickly, as if trying to assure him it wasn't too long. That's nothing, really. And I'll keep in touch. I promise. Daniel frowned, conflicted. You really think this will help? He asked, searching her face for any sign of doubt. I do, she said with a bright, though slightly unsteady, smile. And I think it'll help you, too. We've been smothering each other, Daniel. Some distance could do us both good. Despite the knot of apprehension tightening in his chest, Daniel nodded. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe a short break would give them both a chance to step back and see things differently. It wasn't the solution he'd imagined, but he wanted to show her that he trusted her. In the days leading up to her departure, the house buzzed with Sarah's excitement. She talked endlessly about the landmarks she'd visit and the memories she'd make. Rachel and Natalie called constantly, the three of them giggling like teenagers as they finalized their itinerary. Daniel, meanwhile, stayed in the background, quietly observing as his unease grew with every passing moment. The morning of her departure, Daniel offered to drive her to the airport, but she turned him down. I need to do this on my own, she said, avoiding his gaze. It's not that I don't want you there, but I just need the space, Daniel. He hesitated, the sting of her words settling uncomfortably in his chest, but he didn't argue. Okay, he said reluctantly. Standing by the door with her suitcase in hand, Sarah turned back to him and smiled, a bright, almost carefree smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. This is going to be good for us, she said, her voice full of forced optimism. Trust me. Daniel managed a faint smile, masking the suspicion gnawing at him. I hope so, he replied quietly. Just, keep in touch, all right? I will, she promised, leaning in to kiss him on the cheek. Then, without another word, she was gone, the sound of her suitcase rolling away echoing in the hallway as the front door clicked shut. Daniel stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space she'd left behind. The house felt eerily quiet now, the silence amplifying the unease that refused to leave him. Daniel stood by the window, watching as the car disappeared down the street, a heavy sense of unease settling in his chest. Just 12 days, he muttered under his breath, trying to convince himself. It'll fly by. At first, Daniel clung to the hope that everything was fine. During the first couple of days of Sarah's trip, she responded to his texts, but her replies were short and distant, lacking the warmth he was used to. When he asked how she was enjoying Europe, her answers were painfully brief: "It's fine." Or, "Busy. Lots to see." The enthusiasm, the exclamation points, the vivid details he expected, none of it was there. It felt more like she was ticking off a box than actually sharing her experience. By the third day, her silence began to stretch. Messages he sent went unread, his calls went unanswered. Daniel told himself she was probably caught up in the whirlwind of sightseeing and just didn't have time to check her phone. But by the fifth day, that excuse no longer held weight. The uneasy feeling in his chest grew heavier, settling like a stone he couldn't shake. To distract himself, Daniel turned to social media. He started scrolling through Sarah's posts. She'd been sharing sporadic snapshots, pictures of iconic landmarks, charming little cafes, and cobblestone streets. The images were undeniably beautiful, but something felt off. They lacked the personal touch he expected. No selfies, no group photos, nothing that showed her truly enjoying herself with Rachel and Natalie. It struck him as odd, but he tried to brush it off. Maybe she's just trying to be present in the moment, he reasoned. Still, his curiosity nagged at him. He decided to check Rachel's and Natalie's profiles. Rachel, who was usually very active on social media, had been oddly quiet, posting only a couple of times in the first few days. Natalie, however, had shared more. It was one of her photos that made Daniel pause. The picture was a group shot taken in a bustling piazza at sunset. Rachel and Natalie posed front and center, their faces lit with wide smiles. But what caught Daniel's eye was in the corner of the frame, a pair of male hands, unmistakably cropped out in a hurry. Daniel's stomach twisted. They're in Europe, he told himself. They probably met some people. It doesn't mean anything. But no matter how he tried to rationalize it, the unease gnawed at him, growing stronger with each passing hour of silence from Sarah. Determined to put his suspicions to rest, Daniel dug deeper. He scrolled through Natalie's profile, clicking through every photo and post. After some effort, he stumbled upon a recently uploaded video. His heart raced as he pressed play. The video, though shaky, was taken in what was clearly a lively restaurant. The camera panned across a long table where all three women sat, but they weren't alone. Each of them was paired with a man. Laughter and the clinking of glasses filled the background. Daniel froze the frame when the camera caught Sarah. Though blurry, it was undoubtedly her, sitting close to a tall man with dark hair. She leaned toward him slightly, sharing what looked like a private laugh. Rachel and Natalie were similarly paired, their faces carefree and full of joy. Before Daniel could take in the scene fully, the video vanished. Natalie had deleted it. His hands shook as he scrolled through his gallery to find the screenshot he'd managed to grab. For hours, Daniel stared at the image, the knot in his stomach tightening. The picture didn't definitively prove anything, but it was enough to confirm his worst fears. Sarah hadn't just gone on a girls' trip. She was hiding something, and the silence that now stretched into its fourth day was more telling than any post or text could be. By the eighth day, Daniel gave up on sending texts or making calls. Every unanswered message felt like another blow to his pride, another small humiliation he couldn't endure. Instead, he began to accept a harsh truth: this wasn't working. Whatever Sarah was doing, whoever she was with, it had become painfully clear that her priorities no longer included him. As the days dragged on, Daniel's thoughts turned to what lay ahead. He still loved Sarah, but he couldn't ignore the lies, the secrecy, the growing distance between them. It was too much. Daniel had already started bracing himself for what he believed was inevitable, divorce. He pictured the conversation they'd have when Sarah returned. He vowed to stay calm, composed, and civil, seeking closure, not more chaos. But just as he began to solidify his resolve, something unexpected happened. On the 8th day of her trip, Sarah's social media suddenly came to life. Bright, colorful photos of new cities and landmarks popped up on her account, vibrant snapshots of her European adventure. Yet something felt off. Rachel and Natalie had gone completely silent. There were no tagged photos, no group selfies, no playful comments that usually littered their posts. It was as if Sarah were now traveling alone. The abrupt surge of activity felt strange to Daniel, almost like it was meant to distract from something she wasn't telling him. Her posts seemed like a smokescreen, and the fact that she was still ignoring his calls and messages only made his suspicions grow. Sitting alone in the quiet house, Daniel stared at his phone, a swirling mix of frustration, heartbreak, and anger brewing inside him. By the next day, he couldn't stand the silence any longer. Against his better judgment, he decided to call Rachel. He had avoided involving anyone else in their relationship drama, but his need for answers outweighed his reservations. It took him 2 attempts to work up the nerve to make the call, but Rachel didn't answer. On his 3rd try, his heart pounding, she finally picked up. "Hello?" Rachel's voice sounded hesitant, lacking its usual cheerful tone. Daniel cleared his throat, trying to steady his nerves. "Hi, Rachel. It's Daniel. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." There was a brief pause before she responded. "Oh, Daniel. No, it's fine. How are you?" "Fine," Daniel lied, gripping the phone tightly. I haven't heard from Sarah in a while. I was wondering how you all are doing over there." Rachel hesitated, and Daniel could almost hear her scrambling for a response. "Oh, we're fine. Everything's fine. You know how it is, traveling can get hectic. Sarah's probably just been caught up in all the sightseeing. I'm sure she hasn't had time to check her phone." Daniel frowned. He wasn't buying it. "She hasn't replied in days, Rachel. Is everything okay?" A nervous laugh came through the line. Yeah, totally fine. It's just been eventful. We were almost robbed in Italy, and, the weather's been terrible. Especially in Germany, it's freezing. And the time difference is weird, you know. It's just hard to keep up with everything." Something in her tone didn't sit right with Daniel. Her words felt rushed, almost rehearsed, like she was desperately trying to cover something up. But what really struck him was the background noise. He could hear faint voices speaking English, the hum of a copier or printer, and the familiar ding of a microwave. It sounded like she was in an office, not a European city. "Germany, huh?" Daniel said, testing her. "That's a long way from Paris. Are you guys still traveling together?" Rachel's voice grew tighter, the unease becoming more apparent. "Yeah, of course. We've just been moving around a lot." She paused briefly. "Look, Daniel, I'd love to chat more, but I'm really busy right now. Can we talk when we get back?" Before he could respond, Rachel ended the call abruptly. Daniel stared at his phone, the call screen still glowing, his suspicion hardening into certainty. Rachel wasn't in Europe anymore. The noises in the background, her rushed responses, it all pointed to one conclusion. She was back home. Unable to sit still, Daniel grabbed his car keys and drove across the city to Rachel's house. He parked several houses away, making sure to keep out of sight, and waited. The minutes dragged on, stretching into hours as he watched her quiet street. The weight of his thoughts made the time crawl unbearably. Finally, as the evening shadows grew longer, Rachel's car turned into the driveway. Daniel slumped lower in his seat, his heart sinking as he watched her step out of the car. She was dressed casually, leggings, a sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Nothing about her screamed, "Just got back from Europe." If anything, she looked like someone returning from a local errand. The sight confirmed what he already suspected. Rachel wasn't overseas anymore. But where was Sarah? And why was no one being honest with him? Rachel was dressed in casual clothes, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail, and a takeout bag swung in one hand. She looked tired but relaxed, not at all like someone who had just returned from a whirlwind European adventure. Daniel watched as she unlocked her door and disappeared inside, leaving him in stunned silence. His worst fears were falling into place, one unsettling piece at a time. If Rachel was back, then where was Sarah? And why hadn't she mentioned it? The questions came in an endless stream, each one more troubling than the last. For a moment, Daniel considered confronting Rachel right then and there. But he stopped himself, realizing there was no guarantee she'd be honest with him. He didn't want to reveal how much he already suspected, not yet. As he drove home, his thoughts spiraled. It was the 9th day of Sarah's so-called European tour, yet Rachel was already back. This doesn't make sense, he thought, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Damn it, I'm going to face this head-on. Sarah and I need to have a real talk. The next day, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. She told him she was fine, just busy, and apologized for not staying in touch. Daniel forced himself to play it cool, replying as though nothing was wrong. But deep down, the knot in his stomach tightened. On the 11th day of her trip, Sarah finally called. Daniel picked up on the first ring, his voice steady despite the tension brewing beneath the surface. "Hey," he said casually, masking the frustration he felt. "Hi, Daniel," Sarah began, her tone soft but unsteady. "I'm sorry I haven't been in touch much. It's been a lot. There've been some problems here, and honestly, I haven't been feeling well. I didn't want to worry you." Daniel tightened his grip on the phone but kept his voice even. "I understand," he said calmly. "Traveling can be exhausting. Are you feeling better now?" "A little," Sarah sighed. "I'll explain everything when I get back. I miss you, and I'll see you soon, okay?" "Okay," Daniel replied, though unease coiled tighter in his chest. As promised, Sarah returned on the 12th day. That morning, Daniel had spent hours pacing the living room, his thoughts consumed by anger, doubt, and confusion. He replayed the past 2 weeks in his mind, piecing together the silence, the deleted video, Rachel's early return, everything pointed toward one conclusion. But even now, he wasn't sure if he was ready to hear it from her. When the front door opened, Daniel stood stiffly, his arms crossed as Sarah walked in, dragging her suitcase behind her. Her face lit up with a wide smile, but it felt too bright, too eager. "Daniel, I've missed you so much," she exclaimed, rushing toward him and throwing her arms around him. Her enthusiasm felt off, forced, like she was putting on a show. Before Daniel could say anything, Sarah launched into an animated recounting of her trip. "It was so hard, you know. The weather was terrible, and we ran into all kinds of problems. We tried to make the best of it, but it just wasn't the same." Daniel opened his mouth, but Sarah didn't give him the chance to speak. Her words spilled out in a torrent. "And the food didn't agree with me at all. I felt awful half the time, which is why I wasn't answering your messages. I didn't want to worry you. It was just a lot." Finally, she paused, her expression shifting. "But Daniel," she said, her tone taking on a dramatic edge, "there's something I need to tell you." Placing a hand on her stomach, she hesitated for a moment, watching his reaction. Daniel's heart began to pound. He stared at her, dread building as his worst fears bubbled to the surface. I'm pregnant, Sarah announced, her smile bright and triumphant. That's why everything's been so strange, why I've been moody and feeling sick. It's just hormones, Daniel. Please don't be mad at me. Daniel froze, his mind reeling. Of all the explanations he had prepared himself for, this was the one he hadn't seen coming. His breath caught in his throat as the weight of her words hit him. "You're pregnant?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Yes," Sarah said, her eyes wide, brimming with expectation. "I know this might be a shock, but it's wonderful news, isn't it? We're going to be parents, Daniel." Daniel tried to wrap his head around her words, but the suspicions he'd been suppressing rose to the surface, refusing to be ignored. He straightened slowly, his expression growing colder. "Sarah," he began, his voice calm but deliberate, "I need to be honest with you. I have serious concerns, suspicions, that you've been unfaithful." Her cheerful demeanor vanished in an instant. The smile disappeared, replaced by a sharp glare. "What?" she exclaimed, her voice rising. "What kind of nonsense is this, Daniel? Are you afraid of becoming a father? Is that it? You're scared of the responsibility, so now you're making up ridiculous stories to avoid it?" "No," Daniel said firmly, though the controlled anger in his voice made it tremble. "This isn't about being scared of parenthood. It's about something else entirely. I'm afraid this child isn't mine. That's why I think we need a DNA test. It'll clear everything up, and finalize our divorce." Sarah's jaw dropped. For a moment, she looked stunned, as if he'd physically struck her. Then, her face twisted with anger and disbelief. "Divorce? Are you serious? You're accusing me of cheating and threatening to leave just because I'm pregnant? Daniel, you've completely lost it." "No, I haven't," Daniel shot back, his tone colder now, more resolute. "I've been paying attention, Sarah. You ignored me for days. Rachel lied to me and came back early. And I saw the video Natalie posted, the one she deleted. I know something happened. You've been hiding it all along." Sarah's fists clenched at her sides, her voice shaking with rage. "That's insane. You're paranoid, Daniel. Insecure. I thought you'd come to your senses, but clearly I was wrong." Daniel took a slow, steadying breath, unwilling to let her deflections distract him. "I'm done, Sarah. If the child is mine, I'll take responsibility. I'll be there for them. But I won't stay in this marriage if I can't trust you. The DNA test isn't negotiable." For the first time, Sarah hesitated. Standing in the middle of the living room, her hands trembling, she stared at him. Her face was a storm of emotions, anger, fear, and something Daniel couldn't quite place. He could see the cracks forming in her confident exterior. "Your suspicions are completely ridiculous," Sarah snapped, her voice rising with each word. "Yes, Rachel came back earlier, but that was my decision. I told her not to tell you because I knew you'd react like this, paranoid and overdramatic." Daniel crossed his arms, his expression unyielding. "And the video?" he pressed, his voice colder now. "The one where you were laughing with those men? Care to explain that?" Panic flashed across Sarah's face, but she recovered quickly, her tone turning defensive. "Oh, for God's sake, Daniel. They were just some locals we met at a cafe. They were curious about America, and we talked for a couple of hours. That's all. Nothing happened." "Nothing happened?" Daniel repeated, his voice flat as he held up his phone, showing her the screenshot. "This doesn't look like nothing, Sarah. And even if it were innocent, it doesn't exactly scream girls' trip to me." Her expression hardened, her voice sharpening. "You have no proof," she hissed. "This is just you being scared, scared of how our family is changing. You've always had a problem with change, Daniel. And now you're twisting it around, trying to make me the bad guy. Daniel clenched his jaw, the last of his patience slipping away. Don't insult my intelligence, he said, his tone cutting. You've been distant, dodging my calls, ignoring my messages, and now you're spinning this story? Your behavior's been shady from the very beginning, Sarah. She threw her arms up, her frustration boiling over. Oh my God. Who did I marry? Listen to yourself, Daniel. You're acting like some insecure, controlling man who can't handle his wife having a little freedom. And now, on top of that, you're accusing me of cheating? You'll regret this. Daniel's voice was calm but cold, steady with resolve. What I regret, he said, is trusting you when I shouldn't have. Your actions, your lies, they've been abusive, Sarah. I don't see any way out of this but divorce. For a moment, Sarah's face faltered, her expression crumpling as though she'd been struck. But almost instantly, her eyes blazed with determination. Divorce? Seriously? All because I didn't coddle your fragile ego? Her voice shook with anger, and tears welled up as she pointed a trembling finger at him. Yes, we've been fighting, but I thought you were better than this. I thought you could step up. Step up? Daniel snapped, his tone sharper now. Sarah, this is either a lie to manipulate me, or it's someone else's child. Take your pick. Her eyes brimmed with tears, and she let out a piercing scream. You'll regret this, Daniel. You're throwing away everything we've built. She stormed toward the door, dragging her suitcase behind her. But before leaving, she turned back, her voice icy and detached. If you don't apologize by tomorrow, then you get out of this house. I'm not going to let you stress me out and risk this pregnancy. You've got until tomorrow. With that, she slammed the door behind her, leaving Daniel alone in the suffocating silence of their home. But Daniel didn't wait until morning. Without hesitation, he grabbed his essentials, stuffed them into a bag, and left. He wasn't going to beg, and he wasn't about to play her games any longer. The motel room he checked into was small and impersonal, but it felt like a sanctuary compared to the house steeped in tension and deceit. The next day, Daniel met with a lawyer. As he explained everything that had unfolded over the past few weeks, the lawyer listened carefully, jotting down notes as he went. Finally, the lawyer looked up. It sounds like you've made up your mind, they said. I have, Daniel replied with unwavering conviction. I can't stay in this marriage. Not after everything that's happened. When Sarah discovered that Daniel had filed for divorce, her initial shock quickly morphed into fury. That evening, she called him, her voice sharp and relentless. You think you can just walk away like this? She spat. You're not going to ruin my life, Daniel. I'll fight you every step of the way. Fight all you want, Daniel replied coldly, his tone devoid of emotion. But I'm done with this marriage, and I'll find out the truth about that child, one way or another. Sarah didn't back down. Over the following days, she launched a campaign of chaos. She bombarded Daniel with texts and phone calls, swinging between tearful apologies and venomous threats. She reached out to their mutual friends, painting Daniel as a heartless, controlling husband who couldn't handle the thought of fatherhood. She even hinted at taking legal action to claim the house, arguing that it was in the best interest of her unborn child. Sarah's tactics only escalated from there. Her family and close friends rallied around her, offering support in ways Daniel hadn't anticipated. They spread rumors that twisted the truth, portraying him as a man paralyzed by the responsibilities of fatherhood. Whispers began to circulate within their social circle, accusing Daniel of shirking his duties as a husband and future father. People claimed he was avoiding reality, too ashamed to face the challenges ahead. The rumors painted him as a coward, someone who would rather hide in the bushes than confront his future head-on. The gossip spread like wildfire, and Daniel couldn't escape the sting of public judgment. Everywhere he went, people looked at him with suspicion, as though he were the villain in his own story. Sarah's family fueled the narrative, painting him as an irresponsible man, unwilling to step up for the child they claimed was his. But through it all, Daniel never wavered. Deep down, he held firm in his belief that the pregnancy was either a calculated manipulation or, worse, that the child wasn't his. The suspicions Daniel had carried since Sarah's strange behavior during her trip to Europe had only deepened. The more he thought about it, the more he felt like the walls were closing in, each new detail tightening the noose around his peace of mind. When the trial began, Daniel was forced to face the truth he had been dreading. Sarah was genuinely pregnant. He had held out hope that it was some kind of lie or mistake, but the evidence was undeniable. The doctor's reports confirmed it. Sarah was expecting. But for Daniel, this revelation was merely the beginning of a much longer and more grueling battle. His lawyer wasted no time addressing the glaring doubts about the child's paternity. They made it clear to the court that the timeline of Sarah's pregnancy didn't match up with the periods of intimacy in their relationship, which had been strained and sporadic due to the constant fighting and emotional distance. Daniel's team argued that Sarah's behavior during her European trip left a significant question mark, opening the possibility that the baby might not be his. Sarah's lawyer, however, came prepared with a fierce counterattack. She had a network of supporters, family members, friends, and even a few hand-picked witnesses, ready to testify. They painted a picture of Daniel as an emotionally unavailable and distant husband who had failed to support Sarah during the relationship's difficult times. The most damaging claims were those accusing Daniel of being afraid of fatherhood. Witnesses described him as an irresponsible, emotionally immature man who had been unwilling to face the reality of becoming a parent. The courtroom buzzed with tension as both sides tried to tear each other down. Sarah's lawyer presented her as the wronged party, an innocent woman abandoned by a husband too scared to step up. Daniel, meanwhile, was portrayed as neglectful and arrogant, someone who had shirked his responsibilities for too long. The damage to Daniel's reputation was swift and brutal. Each accusation, no matter how baseless, seemed to stick. Sarah's supporters spread the narrative that Daniel was using the paternity doubts as an excuse to avoid his obligations. Whispers of him being afraid of fatherhood circulated like wildfire. Everywhere he went, Daniel felt the weight of judgmental stares, as if people already believed he was guilty of being the villain in this story. Despite his lawyer's best efforts to emphasize the inconsistencies in Sarah's story and the timeline of her pregnancy, the judge appeared to lean in her favor. A stern man with years of experience, the judge listened carefully but showed little sympathy for Daniel's claims of infidelity. He dismissed the suspicions as speculative, stating that they lacked solid evidence. "I'm afraid," the judge said, his tone calm but firm, "that without definitive proof of infidelity or stronger evidence to suggest the child is not Mr. Daniel's, these remain mere suspicions. A DNA test, once the child is born, is the appropriate course of action." Daniel's heart sank at the ruling. While he felt validated by the acknowledgement of the DNA test, he had hoped for something more decisive. Still, he reminded himself that this was a small victory, a step toward clarity. He would wait, no matter how painful it was, for the paternity test to confirm his suspicions or prove him wrong. Either way, it would give him the answers he desperately needed. The judge also addressed the issue of the property dispute, ruling that no final decisions would be made until the paternity test was completed. Until then, Daniel and Sarah would share the home, as the judge deemed it the most practical arrangement given the financial complexities. Sarah was granted temporary access to the house, allowing her to stay there until the baby's birth. Daniel felt a mix of relief and frustration. While the ruling acknowledged the need for the test, it left him stuck in limbo. He would have to endure months of awkward and tense cohabitation with Sarah, knowing the real battle was far from over, with Sarah's family continuing to spread damaging rumors and her supporters fighting fiercely on her behalf. Daniel braced himself for what he knew would be a long and grueling fight. As the days turned into weeks, the full weight of his situation began to sink in. His life was no longer just about his crumbling marriage, it was now about the future of the child Sarah was carrying and his pursuit of the truth. For the remainder of Sarah's pregnancy, Daniel avoided her as much as possible. The tension in the house was unbearable, but he knew patience was his only ally. Quietly, he marked the days on his calendar, waiting for the baby to be born and for the moment when the truth would finally come to light. When Sarah gave birth, Daniel experienced an odd mix of emotions, relief and dread intertwined. She had a boy. The sight of the newborn stirred something unexpected in him, but he quickly hardened his resolve. He reminded himself why he had waited so long for this moment. The DNA test was scheduled soon after the birth, and the anticipation over those 2 weeks felt unbearable. When the results finally arrived, Daniel's heart pounded as he opened the envelope. His eyes scanned the document, and his suspicions were confirmed: he was not the father. Relief washed over him, overwhelming and bitter at the same time. Months of arguments, slander, and stress, all of it had been for a child that wasn't his. When Daniel presented the results to Sarah, he expected her to lash out, deny everything, or accuse him of tampering. But instead, she looked stunned. "What?" she stammered, her face pale as she stared at the paper. "No, no, this can't be right. That's impossible. You are the father, Daniel. You have to be." "I'm not," Daniel said flatly, holding up the results. "It's all right here." Sarah's disbelief quickly spiraled into frantic desperation. "There has to be a mistake," she cried. "I know it's yours. There's no way it isn't." Her behavior bordered on hysterical. She demanded a retest, convinced that the lab had made an error. "I don't understand," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know it's yours." Daniel, his voice calm but firm, replied, "Go ahead. Do the retest if it makes you feel better. But this changes nothing." Weeks later, the second test confirmed what the first had revealed: the child was not his. This time, even Sarah couldn't deny the truth. She broke down completely, sobbing and insisting she had no idea how it could be true. By that point, Daniel was beyond caring. He no longer wanted her explanations, her tears, or her excuses. Armed with the DNA results, Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. He finalized the divorce swiftly, ensuring that Sarah would have no further claims to his life, his property, or his future. But there was still unfinished business. The damage to his reputation, the months of slander, the whispers that had followed him everywhere, those couldn't go unanswered. Daniel filed a defamation lawsuit against Sarah and her family, holding them accountable for the lies they had spread. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through Sarah's network of supporters. With the DNA test results as irrefutable evidence, Daniel's case was strong. The truth came to light, exposing the falsehoods her family had spread. One by one, Sarah's friends began distancing themselves from her, their loyalty shaken. The legal battle took time, but in the end, Daniel won. He received a public apology and damages for the harm done to his reputation. 2 years later, Daniel had rebuilt his life. He had moved to a new city, started a fresh job, and even begun dating again. For the first time in years, he felt truly at peace, the chaos of the past firmly behind him. One sunny afternoon, while running errands, Daniel bumped into Natalie at a coffee shop. The sight of her brought back memories he'd worked hard to forget, but there was something in her demeanor, nervous, almost guilty, that made him pause. "Daniel," she said after some awkward small talk, her voice trembling. "I owe you an apology." Daniel raised an eyebrow, curious but cautious. "An apology?" Natalie sighed, her gaze darting around the room as though she were afraid someone might overhear. Finally, she leaned closer and spoke in a hushed voice. "Sarah," she said, her tone heavy with regret. She had a lover. She went to Europe with him, not just us. Rachel and I, we knew about it. But she swore us to secrecy. We didn't think it was our place to say anything, Natalie admitted, her voice low and uneasy. Daniel's stomach churned, but he kept his expression calm. So the trip wasn't just a girl's vacation, he said, more of a statement than a question. No, Natalie replied, a flicker of shame passing through her eyes. Sarah had been seeing this guy for a while. I don't think Rachel or I fully understood the extent of it, but we knew she was involved with him. We didn't know she was pregnant, though. She must have assumed the baby was yours. A wave of vindication swept over Daniel, though it was laced with frustration. He had suspected the truth all along, but hearing it confirmed was bittersweet. Why are you telling me this now? He asked, his voice steady but tinged with weariness. Natalie let out a heavy sigh, her shoulders slumping. Because I've felt terrible about it for years. You didn't deserve what happened, Daniel. And I guess I just needed to clear my conscience. Daniel nodded slowly, taking a moment to process her words. Thanks for telling me, he said finally, his tone calm but detached. But honestly? I'm not surprised. I've already moved on. They exchanged a brief, awkward goodbye, and Daniel left the coffee shop. As he stepped out into the fresh air, he felt a surprising sense of lightness. The truth he had waited so long for had finally come, but instead of burdening him, it felt like a release. The confirmation only affirmed what he had known deep down all along: he had made the right decision to leave Sarah behind. For the first time in years, the past felt like just that, the past. It no longer loomed over him, no longer held power over his present or his future. Daniel, free from the shadows of betrayal, looked forward to the life ahead of him with clarity and hope.